Hello, and welcome to Week 4, Unit 3 of Application Development for SAP Business by Design. In this unit, we'll look at consuming external web services. Now, we've already looked in our past units about creating our own web services, generating a SOAP-based service, and being able to provide that to another system to be able to integrate into SAP Business by Design. But obviously, we also have the scenario of the reverse way. SAP Business by Design being able to integrate to an external system. And through the SAP Cloud Application Studio, we have the ability to do that. We're going to walk through basically what the steps are, and then we'll go into the studio and we'll actually go ahead and consume a service. So when we generated our service, we generated a SOAP-based service. But when it comes to consuming external services, we can consume SOAP and REST-based services. This gives us a little bit wider variety of places to integrate with, and the studio makes it very easy to consume these services. A high-level flow of the steps that are needed we've put here on the slide for you. So to talk it over, basically what you'll need obviously is the WSDL file for this external service to be able to consume. Once you have that file, you can import it into the SAP Cloud Application Studio. And from there, we'll create what's called a communication scenario based on it. A communication scenario is basically a collection of web services that relate to one specific integration scenario. If you look at e-commerce, for example, that has web services within the e-commerce scenario that include customers, products, leads, sales orders, things that are related to actual selling of products. In ours, we're going to have just one web service, but we could easily always add more depending on what our scenario is. So if I had more web services for this typical integration, if I want to consume or add in even standard provided SAP services, I have the option to do that, and you'll get to see that in a little bit. Based on that scenario, we can go ahead and create a communication arrangement, which is basically the actual definition in SAP Business by Design of I intend to integrate with this external system through these particular interfaces or vice versa, and here are the credentials for those, what are the endpoints, and actually kind of sets up the real connection in place. Once that's there, then we have something that we can actually call, and we'll go ahead and write logic and some Absol code in one of our objects, actions, or events to actually call that integration. Then we can actually populate the request header and get the info from the response and process that data and perform whatever we need to do with that response. So that's the kind of high level of the steps. Let's go ahead and go into the studio and take a look at it. So I'm logged into the SAP Cloud Application Studio with my development user. And I'm going to go ahead and actually use my existing bonus plan web service that I generated previously as a consuming service. It makes it very easy for me to be able to try consuming an external service and test it out, and if I have issues, be able to see what the issues might be since it's all within one system. You could easily use any other service if you have one, if you'd like to test with, but for now we're going to use just this. I'm going to go ahead and create a new item here, and I'm going to create an external service integration. If I go to the service integration, I can see external web service integration. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to say ext bonus plan 1 web service. And then I'm going to go ahead and say add, and it's going to ask me some info here in this wizard. So is it SOAP or REST based? Ours is SOAP since it's the one we generated. It wants to know what's the actual WSDL file. Let me go ahead and add that. I can give it more XML schema documents if I have that defined, or even allow for session IDs if needed. We don't need a session ID in this case. I'll come back to a communication scenario in a second and say finish here. So now let's go ahead and activate this, and it's gone in, it's brought in the web service, the WSDL file itself. I can go in from here, I can see what the service operations are and what they look like, and once this is active, it'll actually give me a tab within the same panel here to be able to test the web service. So if I want to be able to send some sample data just to see what the response might be, or to make sure that it's working, it gives you a chance to do that from the studio. Before we actually get the connection working, though, we're going to need that arrangement. And to do that, we'll need a communication scenario. I've already set up a communication system within this tenant. And let's go ahead and open the tenant. A communication system is basically what's the actual system or server you're trying to connect to. For us, it's this specific tenant right here. And so I've already created that for us there, and then we'll create our arrangements based on these systems. Now, communication systems and arrangements and even scenarios to that extent are nothing that are specific to the SAP Cloud Application Studio. These are all things that are standard in SAP Business by Design. We're just really creating our own custom scenario, and then off of that we'll generate the proper systems and arrangements. And you could have a number of scenarios if you want. You could create different ones if you have different integration scenarios within the solution. The important thing is that you'll only be able to use that scenario once within that tenant. Which makes sense. You probably won't have that scenario in too many places, but let's go ahead and go into Application User Management and look at Communication Systems. Now in here you can see I have something I've maintained, byd_system. This is my communication system. It has the host name for this tenant that I'm using. I've set the access type as Internet, and had a problem here with my studio, but it looks like it may be okay. And then I have my instance ID, which is created when I save it, and I set that type to web service. So this system is in place. It's now active, so I can use it and start creating arrangements off of it. But before we go ahead and create our arrangement, let's create a scenario. So I'm going to go back here to my external web service integration, and I can right-click on it and say Create Communication Scenario Definitions. Now it's going to ask me, do I want, what's the name of the scenario should be. I'm going to say Bonus Plan Scenario. And then what should it be, the communication type, if it's B2B or A2X. In our case, this is A2X. We're not using B2B. If we were, it would be a very different type of integration. For now, we're going to use A2X. I can allow non-secure URLs if I'd like, and then it's going to ask me what web services do I want part of the scenario. And remember, like I said, I can have any number of web services. You can see that we already had the external bonus plan, the integration, the external file that I basically brought in, even though it's from the same system. But you can see here in the inbound services, there's the actual name of the service that we generated. So you can actually add in also even here standard services. These are all the delivered A2X services that are available. So I can have as many services in the scenario as I want. And the benefit of that is if I have an integration between one system, I can have one place to go ahead and maintain the authorization data for all of these services, no matter if it's inbound or outbound services in SAP Business by Design. Let's go ahead and say next and finish this up. So we have our service here. That works out great for us. Let's go ahead and activate it, and then we'll be able to create our communication arrangement. Now, as that activates, let's go ahead and go back to Application User Management, the front end, and go to Communication Arrangements. And we'll check and see if that's done. Still activating, that's okay. There we go. Now we're active. So now let's go ahead and say New Communication Arrangement. And I should see my bonus plan scenario show up, and I do. It's the second one that's there. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and then it's going to ask me for a system, which in this case is the BYD system I created, which we saw earlier. And then it's going to want some info. So for example, what's the authentication data? For us, I set it up for this admin user to be able to have authorization already. If I can spell it correctly, administration, yes. And then I'll give it a password. And then what are the advanced settings needed here? It's going to need to know what's the actual endpoint. So it knows what the service is, it knows what the port is, and that's actually the right port for us. I'm going to go ahead and get the endpoint from the WSDL file here. Let's go ahead and here. And from this WSDL file, I can easily find it. Let's go ahead and copy this part. Put this in there. I can do a check service to make sure that I've maintained everything correctly. It doesn't actually ping the connection. We'll do that once this is active. But I've maintained the info. Let's go ahead and say finish. And once it's finished, I'll go into there and make sure that it's pinging correctly. So if I say, I can either go back to edit this communication arrangement or view it from the list before. I'm going to go back to this advanced settings. You see now I have a check connection button. Let's go ahead and select that. Ping successful, which is good. So I can close this out. Now that I have that, I can basically add the code that I need to be able to call my web service. So let's go ahead and add a new action to our object. Create via web service. And we'll save and activate that. And while that's activated, okay, so now that we have our new action, let's go ahead and create the script file for it. And we'll say okay. It already has it selected. Since it's an action, it'll automatically always select that. And let's put in our code here. Here we go. So now here's our code for the service itself. You can see that we're using some new syntax here. So I'm creating a variable request, but I'm giving it the type of this library : and then it expects a name, which is actually the name of my external web service integration, the first step we created, bonus plan WS. So this is going to say what's the actual web service, what's the operations, and then the actual request part of that operation. You see if I hit control space, I can see the other operations for this web service. We already want create and request. And basically I'm just going to create a variable here where I can populate my request. So we put in an ID, a description, and then we're ready to call. I could put in more info if I need to. For now we'll leave it at those two. Now I'm going to do the same thing but for the response part. And it's going to be very similar but slightly different in the sense that we're still going to say variable response. I'm still going to give it the name of my web service here with this library : but now instead of saying create.request, we'll say create as a method itself. We're going to call the operation, and every operation will have 3 parameters to it. What's the actual request structure, so the actual data that we're passing to that operation. The second part is a business partner ID. This is only needed in a B2B scenario. Since we're doing A2X, we don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to leave it as a blank quote there, but I have to at least give it a blank quote. And then the last part is what's the name of my communication scenario I created. Ours was bonus plan scenario, so what we have there is okay. Then we can go ahead and perform a few other details here. Now I'm going to go ahead and comment some of these lines out. Once we have our response, we can start processing data with it. But before that, I'm going to go ahead and do a check on if there was any issues that happened, if the web service didn't go through for some reason. And so it gives us this part of the response called communication fault. And for any number of messages that came through with a problem response, this communication fault will be populated, and we can go through and see what that info is. And so I'm just doing a quick check to see if there are any items in here, and if there are any communication faults, I could raise a message appropriately, and then I'm just going to kick out of the action. I won't even continue on. If that process is okay, then I'll go through and I can perform whatever I need to with this exact data. Now for us, I'm going to go ahead and leave it at this and save and activate that. And then let's go ahead and add a button to our UI to be able to call this. So let's add our quick let's go to the, we'll go to the quick activity. Now, right now I have this ID hard-coded. I would probably want to put in something that actually allows it to be dynamic to some extent, or I might actually have some other info that's populating it, but for our test purpose, it's going to work just fine. Now, when I open this floor plan, it asks me to say do an update metadata. That means that every floor plan we have actually has a snapshot of the business object tied to it. And when it loads, it checks to see if that snapshot is different than what's existing in the system. If it is, it tells you that, hey, I need to be updated to know what the new changes are. And so I have a button up here at the top called Update Metadata, which I can press that will allow it to do that refresh. And basically, it's because we added that new action to our business object. So it knows that it's different. Sometimes if you're making a lot of changes to your business object and you haven't refreshed your UI, make sure you go in and update this metadata, because that could cause some bugs or problems for you later on. So let's go to the properties of this toolbar. We're just going to add a new button real quick, an application specific button, which we will call create via web service, and then we'll give it a new on click event. New event handler, create via web service, and I'm going to tie the operation to the BO action itself. I want to go use this create via web service, so I can say BO action, select my business object action, and then I want to make sure I hit this bind button. If I don't hit that, it's not going to work properly. Great. Now we can activate this and actually test it out. So once that's active, we can go in and let's go ahead and refresh this, and we'll go into the tenant again, and let's go in as sales O2P. So now as we go and click that button, it should actually call a web service to create the bonus plan. So if I go to bonus plan here, let's just go into the edit of this one, or I could even say new, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to get in because I would just want to press this button itself. So if I press that, hopefully it goes okay. And then this will generate our new entry. And once it's done, we could actually see that created. So basically, we are able to take some kind of external SOAP or REST web service and be able to consume it using the SAP Cloud Application Studio. And in our scenario, we took our existing SOAP web service. It's a perfect service to be able to easily test this type of functionality out. And through that, we went ahead and created a communication scenario for it. That way we could generate the appropriate communication arrangement off of it. And then we used some Absol code and an action to be able to call that web service. And anytime I create either consuming an external web service, or maybe even if I create my own web services, I may want to create a scenario for it. That way I can properly generate that communication arrangement and give some good technical user ID to another system for the integration, right? And that gives us the benefit of a user that an external system can have access to that specific web service and functionality, and not the other functionality or UIs within my application. So that was consuming an external web service. That's the end of this unit, and in the next unit we'll look at file inputs. Thank you very much.